Hey guys, something a little different today. I was going to stream this, but I decided to just not wait, so we're going to upload a video instead. This is the GKS Golden Key Studios MiG-21bis for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, this module was previously made for P3D, and I believe was mostly just ported across. I'm not sure if they added any new features, but like a lot of the art and stuff is just reused from P3D. It doesn't look too bad considering that the art assets are from an older sim. Well, older in a sense of the word, I guess. It looks alright. It could use some improvements, particularly in a few specific places. We'll get to that in a little while. This isn't going to be like a full-on, in-depth review as such, but what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look around the aircraft. We're going to take a look at the aircraft and kind of compare it with frame of reference to the DCS MiG-21bis and also the actual MiG-21bis frontline fighter variant, which is what this appears to be, at least internally, representing. Now, why did I say internally? We'll get to that in a minute as well. I was actually going to hold off of buying this. I was hoping I'd be able to find a good review of it to kind of decide whether to spend the money or not. It is quite pricey. I believe it's €40 at the moment in the MSFS marketplace. I was also planning on holding off until it was available on external sites so I could get my hands on an unencrypted version, so if I needed to edit stuff, I could. But at this point, I kind of just decided to pull the trigger on it. I have enough disposable income at the moment that I can get away with doing so, and I was kind of disappointed in the lack of really good in-depth looks at the aircraft on YouTube. Now, that's not to say that, you know, the people that have done reviews or little kind of set-piece flights, I guess, with this aircraft have been remiss in any way. It's just that the average MSFS player doesn't really have much knowledge of military aircraft and certainly doesn't have really any knowledge of the MiG-21. Obviously, you know, I'm not a former MiG-21 pilot or anything like that. There's only so much I know, but having spent several years in this thing in DCS and then researching the real aircraft to find out where DCS gets it wrong, I'd like to think maybe I'm just a little bit qualified to have a shot at, I guess, comparing this to where it really should be at. This isn't a true first impressions video. As I said, I've watched some other videos of the aircraft. A couple days after release, I trawled around YouTube to see what videos I could find. A few were just people flying around in third person, you know, they're not really going to show me much. A couple were sort of set-piece flights, like I said, takeoff, cruise around, maybe some very mild maneuvers, and then land. Again, it doesn't really show you that much. With particular regard to the flight dynamics, the MiG-21 has some quite unique behavior, and you're not going to see that come out if somebody's just doing a point-to-point flight. However, I did see enough of a few other things to kind of add to the ambivalence I had towards picking this up. And at the moment, I'm still not sure if this is going to be a purchase I regret or not. Now, I don't want to say that as in, oh, it's impossible to improve or whatever. But there were a few things I saw that did kind of bother me a little bit, and I'm hoping they'll be corrected in future versions, or at least somebody will be able to mod them to be correct. Anyway, before we get into the aircraft, let's take a look around the externals. Just as soon as I actually get the right window highlighted. So there's a couple things going on here. We've actually got a pilot model, an animated pilot model, just chilling with the arm over the side rail there. That's a nice touch. The 3D work itself, it could be better, but this is coming from P3D, and P3D is certainly nowhere near the same sort of graphical department as MSFS is. So I can understand the model being a little lower in terms of detail. It's not bad, but it's not really up to a DCS level of detail, let alone a MSFS level of detail. You can do a lot more with this game's graphics engine. As well as that, the textures I feel could be improved. They are very grungy. It's nice to have a worn-in aircraft, but there are particular areas, like for instance the pitot boom here, where the actual probe and the DUA vanes are just, the texture could be a lot better, put it that way. There's a few details missing on the aircraft in terms of 3D mesh. They're mostly just minor things, like the little studs on the canopy frame, which I think are actually there as either reference points for the aircraft or to attach a canopy cover. I'm not 100% certain, but you can see them quite clearly on the DCS MiG-21. There's a couple of little studs that sit around here on the canopy frame. There's a few other details. With that said, this does, and the periscope's actually missing from this angle, which is interesting. There's a few other details. So the details under that hood are visible from the cockpit, at least with the right lighting, at least to the same level they are in DCS, if not a little more so. We can see the AOA vane there. So this is the actual AOA transducer for the aircraft. This feeds into the UUA1 gauge, which is the AOA indicator. Because it's positioned on the side of the nose, the airflow that hits this vane is already disturbed by the aircraft itself. You do not get a true AOA reading in the MiG-21 like most Cold War jets, in fact like most jets in general. You get a sort of an arbitrary reading, but you get a reading that's distorted by the aircraft's own passage through the air. And so you typically see in American aircraft, they just call it units. It's an arbitrary unit of AOA. The Soviets would call it degrees, but specify degrees UUA1 to kind of tell you, hey, this is what the indicator says. It's not necessarily true AOA. And your more modern aircraft like the FA-18, the F-16, whatever, they can actually, with their flight computers, they can run an equation on the AOA to get your approximate true AOA. Can't do that on the MiG-21. This is going to come up a bit later once we're inside the cockpit, because there is a big issue with this at the moment. The vanes out on the pitot boom, which most people assume are for the AOA and the slip indicator, or the yaw rate indicator and so on, they're not. The DUA vanes on the pitot boom are for the gun sight. It was considered important enough to have accurate readings for the gun sight, for the weapon system, that those vanes are placed out as far ahead of the aircraft as possible. You'll see this mirrored on several other aircraft. The Hind in particular is quite well known for it. Very similar setup. You've got the offset pitot boom, and then you've got the vanes pushed out in front where they're not disturbed by the aircraft's own airflow. Although in the Hind's case, they are disturbed by the 30mm cannon firing. Interestingly, the Perspex textures have quite an aggressive normal map on them. It almost looks as if they're wet when they're not, or they're shattered or something. So I think there are a few places that the textures could be improved. I believe this is 4K maps, just a single 4K map for the fuselage, I think another one for the wings. I think that could be done better. It's not bad, and certainly a lot of aircraft in MSFS using 4K maps. They're much larger aircraft, so it's, the pixels are even more noticeable. But I think it could be done better. I like the way that it's done with the DCS MiG-21, where the aircraft's divided up into, I think it's like 3 or 4 sections, plus the wings. And so each one has a 4K map. So on the DCS-21, everything from here back to just behind the cockpit is a single 4K map. The entire midsection of the aircraft to the brake point here for the engine removal is a separate 4K map. The tail section here is a separate 4K map. And the wings are a 4K map per wing. With that said, about the textures, there are a few nice little details here. As you can see, you've got all your maintenance stencils. The quality of them, this is where I'm going to turn into a monster. The font's wrong. There's a few typos as well, but chiefly the font's wrong. But you may recognize some of these from my MiG-21 livery. I borrowed these. So wherever I couldn't find a clear reference photo of a maintenance stencil, or wherever I knew the DCS MiG-21 had the wrong thing, I consulted this. So this is, in terms of maintenance stencils at least, this is more accurate than the CS21 is. So that's something it's got going for it. I believe the guys that made this are based in Ukraine, so generally speaking, you're going to see less mistranslations and so on, but you might still see the occasional typo. I mean, even if you're writing in a language you speak fluently, it's going to happen. But yeah, like the skin, or you know, the textures are high enough in resolution that everything's completely legible. So, you know, maybe you don't even necessarily need multiple 4K maps. I just think that particularly some of the wear could be improved with that. It would probably also optimize the aircraft a little. This kind of rectangular inspection hatch here is the cover for the flight data recorder. If you've ever wondered where the flight data recorder in a MiG-21 is, the one's so equipped, it is in the leading edge of the tail fin. Similarly, in the MiG-23, it's in the same spot. The MiG-23's access hatch is angled at about I think like a 35-degree angle, kind of parallel to the leading edge of the tail. The ability to tell what's underneath the aircraft, beneath its skin, through reading the maintenance labels is something I really like about Soviet aircraft when they're painted up like this with all the labels on. So, for instance, in the spine here, and this is the correct spine length for a BIS, so they got that right. It's not an MF model, this is a BIS. You've got the ARU system, that's the ARU 3B system there. SOD, that's your transponder. You've got a fuel system valve there. You've got the different fuel tanks labeled. And then you've got a lot of flight control stuff here. The hydro booster, the boost pumps for the NP27's the emergency system, I believe. Then you've got, here's a typo, so that should say Dutchik. It says Utchik, it's missing a D. But yeah, that's the signal filter for the pitch channel. Here we're missing a couple gauges actually. This hatch here between the cooling scoop for the afterburner and the end of the spine, this one that the sun's kind of blinding the maintenance stencil on, this should actually have a pair of, I believe, a pair of gauges. Because this shows you the pressure in the air system, and you can actually see that on the DCS-21. So right there, it appears to be like a very big screw or something on this. That should actually be a gauge, and that should be a gauge, and that would show you the nitrogen system pressure. We got some smoothing errors, or mesh errors in general, going on around the tail here. It's kind of noticeable. I wouldn't imagine that would be a big fix. It's probably just smoothing groups need looking at, but it does catch the light and it catches the eye, so that's something that could be improved. As we got the tail, we've got our different antennas. Yep, exactly what you would expect. There's your IFF odd rods, as the Americans called them, the triple aerial of the SRZ-02M. And then you've got the anti-static wick, and we're missing something on the tail. We're also missing something on the nose. Remember how I said that this is externally, or sorry, I said it was internally a frontline fighter. It was internally an Air Force MiG-21, not the air defense fit that was marketed towards packed allies. We are actually carrying the antenna there in front of the landing gear bay for the Lazur air defense data link. So a frontline fighter would not have that. And we're also missing, where that is, on the frontline fighter, you would have the kind of trident antenna for the RSBN system, the Pion antenna, and you'd see another one facing backwards on the tail where I was looking by the anti-static wick. So externally, this model is an air defense BIS. Internally, the cockpit is a frontline fighter BIS, which is an interesting mismatch. You can see here that when the aircraft spawns in cold and dark, the air brakes are open at least part of the way. You got your plug ports for the ground power there. There's a lot of maintenance stuff down here. Valves and inspection hatches and so on. There's actually reasonable detail up inside the landing gear bay, considering you would not typically look inside there. I believe that's actually more detailed than the DCS MiG-21's landing gear bay is, so that's something. There does appear to be some kind of mesh error happening there in the engine. I'm not sure what the deal with that is. We also have, and this is interesting, we also have the ventral air brake drooped. Now, this air brake should not come down, at least not under power or under command from the pilot. This air brake should not deploy with a ventral store, because obviously it's going to collide with it. I do not know if it would just naturally droop like this and hit the fuel tank while the aircraft's parked on the ground, but it'll be interesting to see if that does or doesn't deploy with the tank on in flight, and then if it does or doesn't deploy with the tank dropped in flight. So we got the 490 litre tanks, one centerline, one per wing. At the moment, this is the only loadout option this thing gets. I believe the devs are planning to add just visual models for weapons later, but the weapons won't actually be usable. That brings me to another concern I had. So the P3D version of this, as well as the previews shown in the dev's own videos, depict the aircraft carrying things like R-73s, which the Cuban MiG-21bis has been rewired to carry, but a normal 21bis can't. But more concerningly, things like sidewinders, which are used by some export customers like Egypt, on the center pylon. The only things that can go on the center pylon are fuel tanks, a nuclear bomb, or an SPS-141 jammer pod. That's the only thing that goes on there. You cannot put any other store on that pylon. It will not fit. And the aircraft doesn't have the wiring to release a weapon from it anyway, except for the nuclear bomb. Likewise, it had R-27s, which look ridiculously oversized on a MiG-21, on the inboard stations on the wings. This aircraft cannot carry the R-27 in any way, shape, or form. Nobody has upgraded to carry the R-27. I don't even know if the R-27 actually would fit within the engineering limits of the aircraft, or even physically fit without impinging upon the control surfaces of the wing. So I'm not sure what that's about. I don't know why they added the R-27 instead of things that this actually carries. It seems like a very bizarre decision. You know, Ace Combat has R-27s on MiG-21s. That's the only other place you're going to find that. So there are some kind of odd design decisions that kind of added to my hesitance to buy this this aircraft. You would think that I would have jumped straight on it with no hesitation at all, because, you know, oh, finally a MiG-21 in MSFS, but I do want something that isn't going to give me the same issues I have in DCS, where I, you know, enjoy it for a while and then find out that, like, almost all the systems are wrong and there's a bunch of stuff that probably isn't modeled at all. As much as I do love the MiG-21 in DCS, it does drive me up the wall sometimes because things are missing or not implemented correctly. I didn't want to have that over again, but also, you know, even worse with things like R-27s on the aircraft. So I know that's splitting hairs for a lot of MSFS players, and they don't care, but for somebody that has an actual, like, interest in this aircraft, it's, you know, like the tube liner guys would notice if one rivet was out of place on a 737 or a A320, so same deal, really, same deal. Otherwise, the exterior does look alright. Again, like I think the textures could use some work. I think the model could use some more detail, particularly around, you know, the pitot probes and the vanes and things. Here we have an interesting thing. So this is, I think this is, if I can get the drone to stop, Jesus. This is probably what we saw glitching through the landing gear bay by the inspection hatch for the engine. It's the afterburner effect. The engine's not running, but it's visible. I don't know what's going on there. This flame holder is the wrong type, actually, for an R25. So this model, like I said, it's an air defense fit bis on the exterior. It's a frontline fighter bis on the interior. and we have an R13-300 engine, not an R25-300. So this is the engine you'd find in like a MiG-21MF or something. The R13 has this kind of radial sunburst kind of spray bar arrangement. The R25 has concentric rings. Otherwise, the afterburner doesn't look too bad. It's about the same in terms of detail as the DCS MiG-21. It is missing the little fuel drain line, I notice. So there's a little tiny little skinny pipe that comes out the back and hangs over the edge of the afterburner shroud, and that's just for draining off excess fuel when the aircraft's parked on the ground, so you don't have a very spicy light off the next time you start the engine. Looking around the exterior, we've got pretty much all the details you'd expect to find. Anti-static wicks, all the little scoops and intakes, the intakes for afterburner cooling, the kind of blister cover for the elbow linkage that runs from the hydraulic booster in the tail there for the pitch channel down over the engine. It kind of forms an elbow that goes over the engine and then into that shroud there, and then it pushes down onto a pin that you can just see in that gap there, right there. It's not actually modeled here, it's just textured, but that's where the pin that the stabilizer hinges on, or rotates on, I should say. That's where it goes, and you can actually see those big screws there. That's where it's screwed onto the stabilizer. So you've got this very complex kind of linkage running from the tail fin down around the engine and then into the stabs, and that's what that bulge is for. The one there on top of the wing, that blister is for the aileron control linkage, and then there should be one for the flap there. So if you've wondered why the MiG-21 doesn't damage its flaps when it deploys them at high speed in DCS, it's a simple hydraulic ram. There's nothing to damage. It simply just overpressures the system, which then pushes the flap back up, pushes the hydraulic fluid back into the reservoir. It's not a big deal. The aircraft has an automatic retract, basically, which is common to Mikoyan fighters and was also common in World War II Soviet aircraft. The reason that some aircraft in DCS, including the Tomcat, can overspeed their flaps, or overstress their flaps, I should say, is because they use torque tubes and they have very bendy wings. A little bit of a mesh error here. We've got a hole in the back of the 490-litre tanks. Just some missing faces there, so we can see through the back face culling all the way through the tank. I know it's little stuff, but it's little stuff you notice. There are a few labels on this, maintenance stencils that is, which it shares with the DCS MiG-21, which are wrong on both of them. I just noticed, but overall, yeah, externally it's not too bad. Custom liveries could go a long way for this. You know, the default liveries aren't bad, but some custom ones could really dramatically improve the looks of the aircraft, I think, particularly on areas that don't seem to have very good pixel density on the UVW maps. Like, just making this a solid color, at least, so it doesn't have this really low-res patchiness that draws attention to just how low-res it is. I think that would be an improvement. External cockpit model, like I said, the periscope's missing. Interestingly, very interestingly, this is, I think, the first aircraft I've seen for MSFS that does not use the actual internal cockpit model on the external model as well. Virtually every other MSFS aircraft does not have a separate, like this is what DCS does here, is it has a much lower detailed cockpit that it uses for the external model of the jet, and then when you're in the cockpit you have a much higher detail one. MSFS doesn't generally do that. MSFS usually just uses the highest level of detail for the entire aircraft, and you won't see it go to a less detailed version unless you zoom way out or get very far away from the aircraft. So that's an interesting difference. I don't know if I'd call it an optimization, because MSFS seems to handle the full detailed cockpits just fine, but it is what it is. Pilot model's a nice inclusion. Could be a bit higher in terms of resolution, both 3D and 2D, but overall, you know, it's not bad. I will say though, I think they have the wrong equipment for an actual MiG-21 pilot, unless it's one of the westernized ones, maybe like a Polish pilot or something. Okay, so that's the exterior of the aircraft. Doesn't look bad, could use some brushing up though. Let's hop over to the interior. First impressions, texture resolution is a little low, which I expected, this being a more or less a port from P3D. It's not low enough to really be like awful, but it could be improved, I think, particularly on the instruments. You don't want blurry instruments. So I think maybe dedicating a little more resolution to those would be a good plan. Now, you'll notice as well, we have unfortunately been cursed with civilian navcom equipment clodged into places it shouldn't be. This one at least is kind of out of the way, but this here, this is where the radar filters control panel should be, and I would... Okay, that's the gun sight switch, that's what that is. Disregard me. I would prefer to have the actual radar control panel here. I don't know if there's a way to hide these and get the actual panel back. I don't know if there was in P3D, I can't remember. I did watch some videos of it in that sim, so... but yeah, I don't know how to do it if it's even possible, but I would like it to be possible, if not. What is that? Oh. Oh, that's the volume for the SPO. Okay, yep. I get it now, because this is the actual frontline fighter layout. So the distance counter for the RSBN and the ARC system goes up here, where we have the SPO in DCS, and the SPO goes down here. The air defense MiG-21s actually have that up here. So that feature of ours in DCS is an air defense feature. Ours in DCS is kind of a weird mix of both. It has some air defense aircraft features and some frontline fighter features, but generally more of the frontline fighter features. What does this do? I have no idea. I was hoping it might swap these out for the radar control panel. Why is that switched on? Just looking around the cockpit in general, it's pretty familiar. Like the DCS MiG-21bis, we are missing the safety cover over the circuit breakers. There should be a metal-framed Perspex cover over these. It hasn't been modeled yet in DCS either. It probably will be when the cockpit gets redone, but it is missing. And it should be there because you don't want to bump these while you're in flight. That would be very bad. No. A lot of the kind of more maintenance-oriented things aren't clickable. Obviously, your main breakers, your fuses, the different ground test equipment, not clickable. Doesn't really need to be. The main electric buses are actually clickable, which they aren't in DCS. Curiously, we're missing our IFF self-destruct here. We only have our ELT equivalent. We do have our IFF channel selector here. But yeah, I don't see the self-destruct for the IFF. So unless it's been moved somewhere else in the cockpit, which is possible, then I'm not sure if this aircraft actually has one, which is odd, because that's kind of a very important piece of equipment you do not want falling into enemy hands. Otherwise, you know, this should be familiar to DCS players. Down here we do have a difference. So this, Hind players might recognize this. This is your magnetic declination correction adjustment, I believe. On our MiG-21bis in DCS, that's an ampermeter, but here, and in most BIS cockpit layout diagrams I've seen, that is where this instrument goes. And the ampermeter goes somewhere else. Somewhere else. I'm not entirely sure where. So we've got a few other things that I want to kind of get to before we actually start the aircraft up. One of them is, I'm not really a fan of having, you know, like version information text or like just watermarks in general here. I would rather that be somewhere I'm not going to be looking at all the time than have it in the corner of the gun sight. You know, just little things like that. Like the cockpit doesn't look bad. It looks pretty pretty realistic, if low res. And then you've got that in the corner of the gun sight. It just seems like it could have been placed better. You know, put it on the back of the ejection seat or something where you have to actually look for it. What else have we got in here? Pretty much a standard equipment. Everything is more or less where you expect it to be. Why is that switched on the ground? What? I'm just gonna switch those off because they shouldn't be on the ground. Or at least I'm not used to them being on in a cold start. We have the actual correct ARC channel selector, it appears. Now, I'm not going to get into the details in this flight of whether the ARC system and the RSBN system work correctly, because they don't in DCS at all. RSBN especially does not work at all in DCS compared to how it's supposed to. It's a dead reckoning system in real life, and DCS doesn't have that feature for it. So we're not going to get into the radio nav stuff. We might cover that in a future video. I need to brush up on the procedures myself because I don't really use them that much. But we do have at least the correct channel selector there, or frequency selector. We do, of course, have our ejection handles kind of synchronized with the stick. I think the animations could be synchronized a little better, but they're not bad. Stick throw looks about right, actually. Like, the stick throw angles look about right, because it is on quite a long extension. Yeah, I'd like to get rid of this very much. What else we got in here? Yeah, everything pretty much as you would expect. I'm not sure what that sound is. It sounds like somebody's pressing buttons, but I'm not. Might be a rogue axis registering movement when it shouldn't be. So, one of the big kind of things that I want to get to, one of the big issues I took with this right away watching videos of other people fly it, the UUA-1. This is arguably the most important instrument in the entire cockpit of the MiG-21. This is your angle of attack indicator. Now, there's a small issue with this, like a nitpick, and then a big issue with this. The small issue is that this instrument cannot be mounted vertically like this. The screw holes on this gauge are arranged offset 45 degrees because on older MiG-21s, it was usually mounted alongside the gun sight. You would have that, you would have your RWR, and you would have your accelerometer, because the MF in particular had a whole bunch of weapons and radar controls up on this panel. Various aircraft also had like nuclear weapons controls on this panel. So those would typically be alongside the gun sight, and they had a very different mounting bracket. So the UUA-1 cannot be mounted straight up and down vertical like this. That's why, if you look at the one in DCS, it's tilted 45 degrees to the left. There's no real rhyme or reason to which direction they're tilted. Some are tilted left, some are tilted right. It depends on what kind of day the factory was having, I guess, whoever was working on that part of the production line. So that's the small issue. And it does affect your flying because, for instance, the way it's mounted in DCS, where it's tilted 45 degrees to the left, that actually puts your critical angle, 28.5 degree critical angle, the border of the yellow and the red zones, vertical. So you can reference the gauge, and if the needle is past the 12 o'clock position, you need to chill the fuck out. Here, you have to kind of give it a more discerning look because the instrument is mounted, you know, perpendicular or straight up and down. Like it's mounted as people would expect it to be mounted. It's not angled. The big issue with this, and this is what I was alluding to with the AOA transducer down there on the side of the aircraft, this is not reading correctly. The UUA-1, as I said, gets disturbed airflow. It doesn't get true AOA. You cannot read true AOA off this aircraft. Even if you read it off the pitot boom, it would still not be 100% perfect true AOA. You'd still have some variation in there. Less, but some. That's why the gun sight stuff's out there, is because it needs to be as accurate as possible. Whereas this thing, you don't need it to be true AOA, you only need a reliable reference. So if you look through the MiG-21's flight manuals, everything is referenced in degrees angle of attack with reference to the UUA-1, not degrees angle of attack true. because true AOA is not available to the pilot, so it's irrelevant. He doesn't know or care what the true AOA is. You can figure out mathematically what it is if you really want to. There's been arguments back and forth on the DCS forums over what exactly that relationship is, but suffice to say, this does not show you true angle of attack in the real aircraft or in DCS. It shows you local angle of attack at the transducer vane on the left side of the fuselage by the intake. That is not how this works in this module in the sim. Currently, this is, I believe, showing true AOA or showing something that looks like true AOA. It isn't showing the values it should be, which is a big problem because you reference everything off of this. You reference the speed that you actually lift the aircraft off the ground at. You reference how much you can lift the nose of the aircraft before you risk departing it. The MiG-21 has quite nasty departure behavior if you get too carried away on the stick. If you're at low altitude, it can kill you because the aircraft will it'll do the wing wag it does in, or the tail wag it does in DCS, but from real life videos I've seen of it doing that behavior, usually by the second or third swing it rolls completely over on its back. Regardless of what you try and feed into the controls, it will flip over on you. And at low altitude, I don't think I need to explain why that's bad. Anyway, the other reason is your landing profile. You reference your landing off of this. Now, I know I reference it off speed a lot of the time in DCS because I'm lazy, and also that's a kind of holdover from civilian flying where everything typically is referenced off speed because we don't have angle of attack indicators and our aircraft don't change weight much. The MiG-21 does change weight much. Even when it's just got fuel on board, no weapons, you will get pronounced differences in your actual landing speed. So you reference this, not the airspeed. And if this is not reading correctly, then how the fuck are you supposed to do a proper landing? You know, like, this not indicating the correct value is a huge problem. You can fly with your airspeed indicator out. Not a good idea, but you could theoretically, but I would not fly a MiG-21 with this inoperative. Like, that seems like a really bad idea. We've got our accelerometer here, as you would expect. Have our status lights for the missiles. I did see in some of the videos that other people made on YouTube, these would light up for some reason, which they shouldn't, because there's no missiles loaded on the aircraft, and those would only illuminate if the missile had tone on something. You know, that's kind of your backup status indicator in case you don't hear tone for whatever reason, like if your headset's not working or whatever. Those should not illuminate for any other reason. And yet they do. I don't know why. There is another thing with the gun sight. You won't see it currently, but once the aircraft's powered up, you will. The gun sight is not collimated. I don't know why. It may just be that they haven't got round to it yet. It may just be that they don't actually care to make it collimated because, you know, it's a civilian sim. I don't know. But MSFS supports collimated displays by default because so many modern airliners have it. It was something that they had to add into the sim. They have. And so there's really no reason for this not to have a collimated gun sight. At the moment, it just looks like it's etched into the glass, which is obviously not correct. It doesn't look very good. Now, having said all that, let's see if my DCS start procedure will get the aircraft up and running without blowing anything up. So we're going to start over here. The SPS is already turned off. So is a lot of systems are actually turned off that would be on by default in a cold start in DCS. So the automatic braking system goes on, that's your anti-skid. ARU goes to automatic mode. Jesus, that shouldn't be. The afterburner nozzle goes to automatic mode. I don't know why that would spawn down. That's a lock-wired switch in real life. That's what that red thing is, the red bracket above it. That's where the lock wire goes on. So that should never ever be down. That's an emergency switch. Also, the nose cone, again, automatic, should be up. That's your helmet heat. And then this is your switch that selects between RSB and an ARC. We won't worry about that right now because we're not going to use radio nav today. Let me just check what else we've got. That's our air start switch, that curiously doesn't have a lock wire bracket on it. In DCS it absolutely does, and that switch probably would be lock wired on the real aircraft. You don't want to accidentally bump that switch and exhaust your entire supply of oxygen for starting the engine, and you also don't want to burn out the circuit that runs the igniters. That would be really bad to have on by accident. Here we have our afterburner cutoff switch, so we'll have that on. Go ahead and turn on the starting equipment, which is a little, it's one of the, I believe the DC transformer, which doubles as a, or the DC generator, I think, which doubles as the electric engine starter. It is not an APU, that's a mistranslation in DCS. The MiG-21 does not have an APU. It's just a simple electric starter. We turn on the fire extinguishing system. We're going to just set the flaps takeoff now, so once the aircraft pressurizes the hydraulic system, they should automatically start moving. We don't need to worry about this because we're not going to be using countermeasures, nor the SPRD pods, which we don't have available to us. The aileron booster we're going to turn on, if we can access it without clicking that instead. There we go. So that's the left one there is the aileron boost system. The right one is the emergency afterburner, which we're not going to touch just yet. We don't need it just yet. This one's for the other guys on YouTube who are flying this thing at the moment. I know a lot of you don't know how to turn the landing lights off or retract them. That's this switch. That's what this switch does. We're going to come over here. We're not going to worry too much about the radio at the moment because we don't need to. It's a slightly different panel than what we have in DCS, actually, which is interesting. We don't have the selector switch for whether we want to hear the Morse codes for RSBN or ARC or not. So we'll then come over, get the nose cone position switch on, we'll get the radio switch on, as I do in DCS. We'll come over here and get the battery heat on. Get the number 1 inverter running. Start up the ground power, or battery connect in this case. Get the generator connected. Hit the fuel pumps. We will come over here and I can't remember if this simulates it the same as DCS. You should actually hit the engine start and then uncage the throttle. But we'll see how it goes. This is set to cold crank at the moment. We don't really need to because the aircraft hasn't been running. So we'll just go up to engine start. We can see the ignition lights come on. We're gonna uncage the throttle. It is actually uncaged. The engine is starting up slowly. Or correction, no it's not. I believe a few people are having issues with the engine start procedure on this. There may be a bug, or it might just be that I'm too used to the DCS method. So I'm just going to hold the starter button until the engine seems to actually catch. Oh, it's not going to catch. Okay, well let's try this then. Let's cage it. Let's hit the starter. Once it winds fully back down. Hit the starter. No. Well, this is interesting. Let me crack it just a little bit further ahead. Maybe it wants some more fuel running through. Nope. Interesting. Now, in real life, by now I would be doing a cold crank to clear out the excess fuel from the engine so it doesn't light in the engine compartment, but try again here. If it doesn't light off this time, I might just use the trusty old Control E to get it running. I don't believe there's documentation for this for MSFS at the moment, only for P3D, so I'm not 100% sure how they've got their engine startup procedure working. Like I said, it's probably just my DCS bad habits. We'll go ahead and hit Control E, which should get the engine going, hopefully. Right, well, while we wait for that to sort itself out, I'll have a look through some of the other switches. We've got our emergency pump there, trim effect there, all the stuff you've got in DCS. We're going to put the nav lights on dim. May as well turn the flight recorder on now. Yeah, the engine doesn't seem to want to catch, which is interesting. We do have fuel, so it should, at some point, get running. It just doesn't want to. There we go. I think it's just really picky about throttle position when you try and start it up. Temps rising slowly. We should start to see hydraulic pressure coming in here. And those two blinking yellow lights will go out. Those are the hydraulic pressure warning lamps for the booster and main system. There we go, NP27's running. That should give us trim. Gonna give myself about the same amount of trim as I use in DCS, which could well be my undoing here. We'll find out together. Before I do that, I actually need the number 2 inverter and the other generator running. Now we can keep going. Flick on all our avionics. The weapon system we don't really need, but we'll just turn it on anyway. We'll get everything running we usually would in DCS. That's our IFF there. We'll come forwards to this console. Some of these are already on. So that's the wave selector for the transponder. Transponder's on. Compass. Is Delhi 81. We're going to leave that the fuck alone. Not that I doubt that's modeled. It's not modeled correctly in DCS, but I doubt it's even modeled at all here. That's our SPO, our radar warning receiver. It's currently set to mute. Test button does actually cause it to light up. It, if I can click the test button, the click zones are really kind of awkward on things like this. There it is. For some reason we aren't getting any audio out of it though. It might not be modeled in. Let's get the gun sight on. That's not turning it on. There we go. So as you can see, it's essentially acting like it's etched into the glass. It's not collimated, and I think this is partly due to how MSFS does anti-aliasing, but it's artifacting quite badly every time I move my hand. So we're just going to leave the gun sight off because it, like, honestly looks kind of like shit. Which is very disappointing. There we go. The click zones are really picky in MSFS. Oh, okay, well the power switches don't work. apparently. Oh, those are... No, correction, those aren't power switches, those are for the reserve bulbs. DCS gets that wrong. This actually does have that right. So, my apologies. That's a DCS-ism. And you can see that on things like the Heinz gun sight, where it selects between main and reserve bulbs. We're going to set that to... we're going to leave it caged, because you don't want it uncaged when you take off or land. You can damage the sight gyro, so you would not take off or land with it uncaged. Go ahead and correct the HSI, although it looks like it's already correct, or I just don't know if I'm going to need to plug something in to correct it. I might need to put in the declination myself. I don't know what the declination is where I am. I'm flying from Krimsk, so I should know because DCS player, but I don't. This is another thing that's done wrong. So this is the jettison for the wing tanks. In fact, if you look, it says Spros Bakov here, but on the DCS one, or actually even here on the label, Spros KR Krila is Russian for wings. So jettison wing tanks. You click this on this module, it jettisons the centerline tank. To jettison the wing tanks, you have to come down here to your emergency jettison for your stores. This does work for the fuel tanks on the real aircraft, but it's not a real good idea. On the real plane, you just open this, punch that, the wing tanks are gone, and then the belly tank is this red guarded thing here, as I've shown on my actual MiG-21 stick a few times on stream. This red guarded button here is how you jettison the centerline tank. The reason it has a separate jettison button for the wings from the centerline is because the wing tanks will drain before the centerline. They will always drain first, so you need to be able to punch them off individually. That's why there's this, and then there's one for the centerline. That's the reason that's there. So that's a thing that is modeled wrong, and that's a pretty big deal because the way the aircraft is wired to the hard points, this cannot physically issue electrical impulses to the centerline pylon. It only goes to the wet pylons on the wings, which are the outboards, number 3 and 4. Got our nozzle braking here. We want that. Okay, that's acting as our parking brake, which it shouldn't be. So what this does on the real aircraft and in DCS is this engages or disengages the nose wheel braking. You have 3-wheel braking to stop in a shorter distance than if you just have the main wheels brake. Common feature on Soviet aircraft, and that switch toggles between nose wheel braking disabled, which allows you to use differential braking to steer on the ground, and nose wheel braking enabled, which gives you maximum stopping force. So to taxi, you would have that switched off, and to take off and land, you would have it switched on, in case you need to abort the takeoff or, to stop you on landing. Over here, we've got the gun arming buttons, we've got the master mode air-to-air, air-to-ground switch, we've got the seek ahead mode selected. This is all the same as DCS. It doesn't function as far as I'm aware, because you don't even have weapons in this, but it's modeled, at least. Like, it's visually modeled, everything's where you would expect it to be. The emergency brakes, I don't know if they work, we're not going to test them just yet. Brake pressure... We lost a surprising amount of air just by releasing the brakes and putting them back on. So this, unlike the DCS MiG-21, actually doesn't spawn overfilled. It's showing less pressure than it should have. Both systems should have 130 kilograms per square centimeter in it. In DCS, it spawns showing 150. In this, it spawns showing 100, so neither of them have got it right. This panel down here is various radar-related things, which include the degauss for the screen, and then the selector whether you want to be in training mode or combat mode, which affects the guidance frequency for the R3R missile. Here we have the controls. Let me actually just... Let's do some science. Okay, that's not implemented yet. I don't know if they plan to implement it, but that is your nose cone manual control. So me dialing this around should be moving the nose cone. Like, that should override the automatic scheduling. That should move the nose cone no matter whether I'm on the ground, in the air, it doesn't matter. That should move as soon as I start dialing this knob with that switch in the automatic, or sorry, in the manual position. Not something you would do normally, it's an emergency procedure. But I did notice in some of the videos I watched, this instrument did not move. And the filled needle, so the hollowed one is your requested position for manual mode. The filled needle is the actual position of the nose cone. That should be moving in flight, particularly as you accelerate, and particularly as you get towards Mach 2. If that needle isn't moving, either it means that the nose cone's not moving, which it should be, because like that means that the engine's not simulated properly. That has like a whole knock-on effect if that's not moving. Either that or it is, but then the instrument's not working. This is the ARU. The ARU does actually appear to have some sort of scheduling to it. I haven't checked to compare it with DCS or the charts to figure out if it's correct or not, but it is functional to some degree. So that's nice to have. What? We've got some different click spots here for stuff, including an auto level. Like, a lot of this stuff is stuff that exists in the cockpit, like the button for the parachute, the braking parachute release, or like the one to deploy it is right there. The jettison is there, as it is on DCS. The level, like, I don't know why you need those on the gun sight, because literally, like, my dude, it's right here on a stick. I don't know why you need those. Some of the other things, like looking at this radio thing, I'm kind of hoping maybe in the future I'll be able to click that to get rid of this shit and put the actual control panel there. I'm not sure what this is. I'm kind of scared to click it. Yeah, I don't know what it does. We're just going to leave it alone. You do actually have, this is interesting, you do actually have some ability to mess with your charts here, which is kind of cool. That's something. I like that. Not sure about this one. No, it doesn't look like that one's clickable at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and do what I usually do. We're going to get the cockpit lighting cranked. Get that beautiful pinkish orange glow happening. Oh, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so with the jet running and all that done, we have not set our fuel. It doesn't do it automatically here, guys. Not like DCS. So we got 3 wing tanks. So 2800's full internal. I need to do some quick maths, because I am very bad at mental arithmetic, especially when I'm trying to record a video. So I'm gonna see in just a moment here. Where's my calculator gone? There it is. 2800 plus 3 times 490. 4270. We're just going to set it there. I'd rather be slightly under than slightly over. You imagine the complaints on the DCS forums if people had to fucking set their fuel manually at the start of every flight? It'd be wonderful. I would love that shit. Concerningly, every single switch on the Newt control panel is on. These two should be locked. Sorry, these 3 should be lock wired, and these should be off. So this is the Newt control panel for those who haven't seen my Hasab adventures in DCS. This control box was added to the MiG-21bis when it was relegated to a fighter bomber role, as the MiG-23 entered service and began to supplant it in the air superiority and sort of frontline fighter role. These panels, in DCS, it gets added when you load a nuke. In the actual real aircraft, it was substantial wiring that had to be done. So these panels were permanently affixed, more or less. and involved, you know, extra wiring to the aircraft. Same with the jammer pods. It wasn't something you just put on or took away. You could probably do it over the course of a few hours or something, but it would, you know, be a pain in the ass. So generally the aircraft were prepared for the expected mission type and then just left in that configuration. This left one is your emergency jettison. This one here is your emergency jettison fused or unfused switch. So if this switch is up and you emergency jettison the bomb or it rips off the pylon, that bomb is alive. So this is your I'm taking you all to hell with me switch. This is your normal arming switch for the bomb. Boyevoj bros is like combat drop, I guess you could say. So that's your actual normal arming switch for the bomb. Spets AB is your special air bomb, which is your nuke. Nice bit of a euphemism there. And then with the switch in the down position, your weapon release button works for your normal rockets, your air-to-air missiles, bombs, and of course your trigger for the gun. So that switch just selects between what your weapon release controls, whether it's the nuclear bomb or your regular weapons. This is the braking parachute for the bomb, and then this is your air burst or your ground burst setting. And then we've got this light appears when the bomb is suspended under the aircraft, so that should be on to tell you you do have a nuclear bomb attached to you. This comes on when the bomb is live and ready to go. Like this means the bomb is armed, and then this is like a safety for the bomb. It's it's a safety light. One thing as well, particularly with respect to the fact that the UUA doesn't work correctly, I'm curious with whether the SUA lights will illuminate properly. So these two brow lights here, as DCS MiG-21 pilots will know well, these things illuminate at a certain frequency to warn you you're approaching your critical angle. The speed at which they blink tells you like how aggressively you're approaching that critical angle. I don't remember exactly what the relationship is, whether they blink faster or slower when you get closer. I don't remember because I just see blinking red stuff and I realize I need to chill out. Like the specific degree of blinking is not a big deal for me. Oh, I've hidden my stick. How did that happen? Oh, I bet. Yeah, okay, so that's what that does. That hides the stick. Okay. Well, that's, we've learnt something. Got our rad alt down here. Oh, clicking the stick also hides it. Okay. I don't know if I can click that. Nope. I guess that's not functional. Pitot and clock heat's on. Our tactical drop switch does appear to work. Emergency launch, yep, that works. Or at least it's uncoverable. I don't know if it actually does anything. We're going to wind this back to about 3900 since I've been sitting here talking so long. One little nitpick of mine is some of the fonts. So generally, like, this isn't bad. This is actually photo texturing as far as I can tell. It's either photo texturing or it's very close to being like 100% correct for font. Now, with that said, we got the correct labels for Abyss, it looks like. So the labels are slightly different between the BIS and the MF, and you can tell when somebody's used MF labels. The DCS MiG-21 used a couple of MF labels. But yeah, this looks more or less correct. But then we have, down here, for instance, on the radar power panel, is that fucking Comic Sans, my dude? It looks kind of like Comic Sans, I'm not gonna lie. Why though? Why though? Like, even if you don't have the correct font to... Like, even if this is all photo textures and you don't have the actual font to make this panel and you don't have a photo reference for it, just pull it from the other panels, you know what I mean? So this... You know, I don't know what's going on there. And also the... is there a test? No, there isn't. You should be able to push this in to test the different lights, but it looks like it's not modeled. Ah, that's the test. Okay, so only this one works as a test. It should be any of these you push in, it will test all the lamps. But so as you can see here, the font on the annunciator lights is also fucking Comic Sans apparently. So I think that could be done better. A few of the, like the text on a few of them is different than the DCS-21, which is to be expected. The annunciator panel text did change between batches. This has a running second hand, which it shouldn't. This does not have a running second hand. Oh, actually, no, I stand corrected. This is an earlier model than mine. It might do. Mine's only got the 30-minute stopwatch down the bottom. What else we got here? The radar screen. Okay, so the radar scope, it looks kind of there. This whole rubber boot should actually be angled upwards a bit. It doesn't stick straight out like this. The DCS MiG-21 has the same problem. It sticks straight out, so you got to fucking like do these ones. You got to go tawny mode to look down your radar scope. It's actually even worse here because you've got to really hunch over to see it. The DCS one's at least a little bit angled up, but this boot should be angled up towards the pilot's eyes. You can see the radar screen there behind it, and then this angled lens. This is your filter for night flying, so it's not clickable here, and it's also not functional. In fact, the lever's even missing here. In DCS, the lever used to be clickable, but it didn't actually do anything. But there should be a lever here which rotates around the outside of the radar scope, and what that does is it uses a polarized filter on this to darken or dim the scope so you don't blind yourself when you're night flying. But yeah, this should be angled up a bit more so you can actually see the fucking radar. My gyro. What is going on here? Oh, I know what's going on here. I'm a dumb fuck is what's going on here. There we go. That's more like it. So now, yeah, we'll just double check on that, and then this should be good. I'm not entirely sure why it's showing me as 10 degrees nose up. We'll manually correct that. It's not very precise with the clicks. Right about there should do us. Just trying to think if there's anything I've forgotten because I've been talking for so fucking long. Flaps are set to take off. Yep, that's good. We're not going to fuck with the autopilot. You would possibly take off with stabilization mode on in the real aircraft because there's not really much harm in doing it, but I don't trust this enough to do it yet, and I certainly wouldn't do it in DCS because the stabilize mode in DCS is fucking homicidal. It's not programmed correctly at all. Or, well, it doesn't do what it should do. I don't know how it's programmed, but like the system doesn't function the way it should. Okay, I think we're good enough to go now, so we're going to go ahead and close the lid. Oh, it automatically locked and sealed it. Okay, never mind. Need to bind up my brake axis on this stick in MSFS, because I haven't done it yet. The default head position for this was a little far back and zoomed out for me, so I've moved it to be as close to my DCS head position as I could get it, just for, you know, keeping things consistent. I will note that I don't need to differential brake to steer this thing on the ground. It will steer just with rudder inputs, which is obviously not correct, but I think that's possibly a MSFS issue. As far as I'm aware, nobody really has good working free castering wheels yet, so that's probably why it's steering with the rudder. Like I said, we are at Krimsk. Should be familiar to DCS players, or anyone who's done Russian Air Force pilot training. Unfortunately, the sim has turned all the hazards here into sheds, but oh well. I'm gonna go ahead and make sure my gear safety lever is that's not what I wanted to do. Like I said, click zones. Can I unlatch that? I guess not. Maybe it automatically unlatches with the gear binding. We'll find out, I guess. I just don't want to overspeed the wheels. I also don't know if it'll automatically go back to neutral for me, or even if the up position bleeding off brake pressure is modeled in this. The sounds from this, I believe, are taken from one of the vanilla aircraft. The sounds themselves are honestly not good, and the way they're mixed. The switches and buttons are far too loud, and the engine is far too quiet. The MiG-21 apparently does have a reputation for being relatively quiet in the cockpit, but yeah, like it needs to sound more like a jet, and less like a very quiet, very distant vacuum cleaner. Sounds is something that's relatively easy to correct, at least, so I'm not going to hold that against the devs right away. I believe I'd heard from somewhere that they were still making up their mind whether they wanted to go full W-wise on the sounds or what, so if the sounds are work in progress, that's fine. It's just, you know, they could have made a better first impression, I think, by playing a bit more with the volume and using some better samples. So if this was DCS, once I'm lined up, I'd be turning on that nose wheel braking switch, but because this uses that as a parking brake, that would be a bad idea. We're not going to do it. Okay, flaps set to takeoff. The light's on, so we can confirm that. We're not going to... Oh, we can kind of visually see them. I've got my trim set as close as I can to what it is in DCS for takeoff. However, my curves in DCS are very different to the ones here, so I don't know if that's going to kill me or if it's going to work the same as it does in DCS. It probably won't. But yeah, let's just have one quick look around. I don't know if the afterburner on this automatically activates as you push through the entire throttle range, as it should, and as some of the other third-party afterburner stuff does, or if it requires you to press a button like the default MSFS Hornet does. I guess we'll find out together. Because here we go. Okay, it's just pushed through. The afterburner light has lit. The emergency burner light has come on, which is interesting considering I have the emergency burner turned off. The aircraft's pulling very hard to my left for some reason. And she's up. I'm going to go ahead and pull the flaps. She's very bouncy. Okay, gear goes back to neutral automatically, it looks like. We're going to turn on the stabilize mode. We're going to come out of burner. If you look at how I'm turning now, how hard I'm turning now, that angle of attack indicator should be up around 15 or 20 degrees. That's where it would be in DCS. So we're going to come off the power. The aircraft doesn't want to lose speed. Interestingly, the afterburner, or not the afterburner, sorry, the air brakes didn't want to come out for a minute there. Okay. I'm a little low to be doing this, I think, but see, we're showing 10 degrees angle of attack. This should be about 20 to 25. This should be about 28. Just by eye, that's what I reckon this would be, about 28 in DCS. I can feel the right wing slowly starting to drop. Let's just send it, full backstick. Okay, the aircraft is not giving me any more pitch. It's just kind of... That's disappointing. It's just kind of dropping forwards, which is what the DCS MiG-21 did for the longest time, but there's no wing rock exhibited, there's no sort of shimmying behavior that you characteristically get from the MiG-21 at low speeds and high angles of attack. We'll just give us some more juice to get speed back so we don't go into the ground, but that's something that really needs looking at, because that is a distinctive flight characteristic of the MiG-21, and the aircraft really should be doing it. And so far, of all the MiG-21s I've played in different sims and different games, DCS has the only one that exhibits that behavior to any degree. Obviously this one doesn't, the one in War Thunder doesn't at all. The War Thunder MiG-21 essentially doesn't stall, really. It just keeps pulling its nose up no matter what. Interestingly, we're quite out of trim here, so I wonder if we've got a really strong crosswind, maybe. My air brake's still out. Which is very interesting. So, I have to actually toggle it with... That shouldn't be toggle spoiler, that's extend spoiler. The retract spoiler did nothing, so it needs to be toggled. It's actually like the DCS MiG-21. I only have a toggle for it, I don't have a extend and retract switch position. Looking at the engine RPM and looking at our airspeed, especially with 3 490-litre tanks on board at this altitude, yeah, I don't know. I feel like our RPM's a little low for the kind of speed we're getting here. I also feel like our angle of attack is, well, I mean, obviously, because the UUA is incorrect, it's not reading correctly, but if that's showing true angle of attack, we should not be sitting at 0 at this speed. We should be probably, like, at least 2-3 degrees, maybe a bit more. The MiG-21 has a 0 incidence wing. So, yeah, like, if you're slow, you're going to have some angle of attack on the aircraft. The ARU needle is sitting in about its middle position. We have a look. Height in kilometers is the inner scale 5, and then airspeed in thousands of kilometers, oh sorry, hundreds of kilometers an hour on the top, but it's shadowed over, so I can't read it, and I can't remember what the positions are normally. I think it's like 700 kilometer an hour. So yeah, it actually is scheduled correctly, I think, more or less, or at least close enough. It's doing something, so that's a start. The fact the ARU is actually simulated at all is a start. Now, I don't know if it's going to limit our control authority, or if it's just there for show. Well, I can't pull hard enough to break the plane, so we're going to assume it's actually doing something. It is actually working. Check the roll rate. Pretty quick. Yeah, she's a bit rolly. There's a lot more feeling of inertia than the DCS-21. The DCS-21's kind of weird. You have a feeling of inertia with the stabilizer turned on, which you shouldn't. Not to that degree, anyway. Because the way it's working in DCS is just damps your inputs, which is not how that fucking thing works at all. But here you have quite a bit of inertia kind of feeling, but then it picks up speed real quick. Now we're getting a Sork light flashing. It's telling us that our external tanks are empty, which means we need to wind this back a little further. We're going to go ahead and, like I said, this is for the wrong tanks, so we're going to go ahead and push this, and I'll show you why is... oh, right, because the animations don't play until you go into the external view. That's a MSFS issue, I think, not a module issue. So, see that jettison the center line? That should have jettisoned the wing tanks. That should not be wired to the center line at all. And then if I go around here, I can't even click that, so to jettison the wing tanks, I have to come down here to the outer position for the wings, and hit that, and then that should have got rid of them. Interestingly, the wing tanks weren't visible from the cockpit. I don't know if you guys noticed, but when I looked back over my wing the last few times, they weren't there. So that's something I think could be improved as well. We're cruising at almost 850 kilometers an hour indicated. I don't know why the Sork light's back on. We're cruising at nearly 850 kilometers an hour indicated, more or less level. There's 850 now, and according to the RPM, we're sitting at 80%. Like, where's my afterburner kick in? There. I would expect the afterburner to light off past 100%. And mill thrust to be at 100%, so I'm not sure what the deal with that is. Maybe they've simulated it right and DCS has it wrong. Maybe it's the other way around, I don't know. It's just bizarre that the RPMs are so low in mill thrust, because this is basically at mill thrust right now, or slightly, very slightly below it. With small inputs, the aircraft is quite slow to roll at this speed. We're doing nearly 1,000 kilometers an hour. In fact, even with large inputs, remember that the aileron boost is on, the aircraft doesn't really want to roll at this speed. See what kind of turn performance we get out of it. With one stage of burner. We're accelerating rapidly to VNE. In a turn, which should not be happening. Let's get that first stage afterburner on again. I don't know why it's activating the emergency burner. I have the switch for it off, so it should not be able to activate the emergency afterburner. And then when I try and come out of emergency burner, it comes out of burner altogether. So that's very bizarre. The only thing I can think of is if somehow the position of the switches is reversed. Which I don't think it is. I'm not going to get too hung up on turn performance today. I'll probably do like some actual testing of turn performance, climb performance, whatever, some other time, but today's, I mean, it was supposed to be a first impressions video and it's fucking an hour and a half long already, so we'll save that for another day, maybe for a stream or something. Let's get some altitude. We'll just firewall it. Yeah, look at the airspeed build. Look at the airspeed build. Even with the emergency burner on a clean jet, that is ludicrous. I'm climbing in a 40-degree pitch angle right now. 35 degrees, it's slowly bleeding off. We're just brushing our VNE. 45 degrees pitch before it finally starts dumping speed. And we're at 10 kilometers already. So, compared to the DCS MiG-21, this is a spaceship. There's 15 kilometers. It's about 49,000 feet. Bit of a bank. So this is like MiG-29 level climb performance. MiG-21 doesn't possess the power to do this. So this needs some heavy tuning. This is not within the realms of possibility for this aircraft, put it that way. We have just climbed, without any kind of climb profile from the ground, to 22 kilometers. The engine should be fucking dying of oxygen starvation here in a minute. It would in DCS. We're at 400 kilometers an hour indicated. The speed's washing off so slowly. Mark 1.4, and that was such a steep climb. So if we now level off and let the speed build through level acceleration at 22 kilometers, which I should add is above the sustained level flight ceiling of this aircraft. This aircraft's level flight service ceiling is about 18 kilometers. If it's very lightly loaded, you might get away with more, but this thing should not be doing this. Any which way you cut it. It's trying to level it out. Here it is trying to descend on me. I'm not sure if I've even got enough trim to level it off here. Oh, you know what? We can just do this. We'll see if this works at least. At this altitude and this airspeed, it shouldn't. At this airspeed, it should be pushing the nose down to try and pick up speed. It does look more or less like the autopilot's holding us pretty close to level. But yeah, like there's no way this little jet has the performance to get this high this quickly. This is like DCS Vigan level performance. It's pretty memey. Not entirely sure what's going on with my RPMs there, bouncing around like that. One thing I will say is now we have hit about 570 kilometers an hour indicated, or Mach 1.7. The jet doesn't really want to go any faster, so we're going to ditch the autopilot. We're going to roll inverted. Oh, she wants to roll at this fucking altitude, Jesus. The ARU's still scheduling. The ARU should not be scheduling at this altitude as far as I'm aware. Certainly in DCS it cuts off sharply at 7 kilometers. The gauge ends at 7 kilometers. So while I kind of suspect in DCS it may not be 100% as well, the ARU has no reason to really function up here because the air's so thin and your indicated airspeed's going to be so low. We have now just accidentally accelerated to Mach 2 without really even trying. I don't think this is going to have sonic boom modeled. Seems a lot of the third-party stuff doesn't have it yet, even though the sim now supports it natively. Has done for a while, actually. Another thing I'll add is the DUA vanes for the gun sight out there on the pitot boom are not animated at all. They will not move no matter what the aircraft does, which is kind of disappointing because they're right there in front of your face. Watching them kind of move around in DCS is one of those little satisfying things I've always liked about the MiG-21. It's one of the cute little touches that made me buy it in the first place. Not present here. Likewise, the pitot boom does not really show any movement in the air with this. It will, okay, this is not doing what it should be. It will show some vibration on the ground on takeoff and landing, but it won't show it in the air, particularly when you pull hard maneuvers. I was out of afterburner there. We were super cruising at Mach 1.8 for a good couple, good minute or two there, which, again, this thing will just about cruise at supersonic or slightly past the sound barrier when it's very light on fuel at the right altitude, but again, it shouldn't be doing it by this much. We are getting all kinds of warning lamps here. We've got our 450-litre warning, which is interesting. It means that the fuel gauge hasn't been reading correctly, or not fuel gauge, the totalizer hasn't been reading correctly. Hasn't been correctly tapping off the fuel burn rate to figure out how much we actually have left. So we are going to need to find somewhere to land pretty quickly. We're just about at flight idle now, just cruising. So let's just see what it does if I pull the nose up with power off at this high of an altitude, intentionally let the speed bleed off. Okay, maybe it does have a sonic boom. Or something just happened anyway. Again, we zoom climb to a ridiculous altitude there. The aircraft just should not be able to do that. Its performance is good, but it's certainly not that good. And we had no hydraulic pressure for a minute there. Okay, it's going to enter a spin. That's something you won't really see it do very often in DCS. I have had it spin on me in DCS, but it's exceedingly rare. And it's very hard to force it to do it. The 21 doesn't like spinning. It's quite violent. And my attempt... Oh my. Oh my. So I'm just feeding in rudder to try and get it to stop. And it did that, whatever that was. Conveniently, there's a runway down there. I don't know if it's long enough, but we'll find out. Yeah, it doesn't seem to model sonic boom. Which is not surprising, to be honest. One thing I do want to check, actually, while we still got the external view, is I want to pop the air brakes. And where is it? Down here. Okay, so the trailing air brake should be coming out. That one, right there, behind the gear well, should be coming out with no belly tank on, no ventral store. That air brake should come out whenever the air brakes are selected. It is not. So that is also not correct. We're going to see if we can land this thing. We are pretty light on fuel. I don't actually know how much fuel we have because the clearly the totalizer is not reliable. But we'll see how we go. This will be my first landing in this aircraft in this sim. Obviously, I have a lot of experience landing the MiG-21 in DCS to the point I can do it in my sleep just about, but none in this, and having seen the variation between this and the one in DCS already, I doubt that any of the experience is going to carry over. So, initial impressions, I am not honestly at all surprised. It's kind of what I expected. It looks like a MiG-21. It has some trappings of the MiG-21 systems-wise. I mean, like I said, I didn't do any radio nav stuff. Maybe the radio nav in this is actually simulated correctly, unlike DCS. But it just comes back to what I'm ultimately going to say, which is the aircraft doesn't fly like a MiG-21. And, you know, there's enough wrong with the other systems that even if this had, like, perfect RSBN implementation, I'd still be kind of hesitant to recommend it to anyone. Which is a shame, because this sim does need vintage Soviet military aircraft. You know, that's something I would happily fly all day, but I feel like this has a long way to go before it's at the point where I'd recommend it. I hope that the devs can continue working on it, and I hope that it does reach that point where it becomes something I would happily recommend. It becomes something that, you know, all that time in DCS does carry over, and then perhaps this model syncs correctly that the DCS one doesn't. But as it stands right now, the flight model is UFO, for want of a better term. I'm going to have to use the air brakes here and be a naughty boy. Okay, let's get the takeoff flaps. We'll get the air brake in. I'm going to go ahead and drop the gear. We're going to go full flap. Blown flap system. I should have turned on before. It's going on now. I'm not going to bother testing to see if the afterburner fails to light off with the BLC system on like it does in DCS now, because I very much doubt that's modeled. And even if it is, it's like that's not really going to be enough to offset the module's other issues, I feel. I'm sitting kind of in the BLC range. Actually, looking at the RPM, this would be below BLC range in the DCS MiG-21. Like, the RPMs in this seem lower across the board for some reason. The throttle's about in the same physical position, at least, so that's something. I would normally be referencing the angle of attack for this approach. I'd be trying to hold 10 to 12 degrees angle of attack. I cannot do that with this module. It will not let me. We're already slow because I had a momentary lapse of attention. I don't know if I have enough fuel for a go-round, so we should be able to just about manage this. No, the aircraft's sinking on me. I'm going to go ahead and pull the flaps up a stage. I'm going to firewall the engine. I'm going to pull the gear. And we're going to go around and hope we have enough fuel to go around. So there's definitely more need than in DCS to make sure you do not get slow, because you will not recover from it in this. Versus DCS, where you can just, you know, kind of dip the nose a bit for a little extra speed, manipulate the throttle. As long as you stay out of afterburner, you're good to go. This does feel a bit more like trying to land the IL-2 1946 Soviet jets with BLC, like the Su-15 that I notoriously only landed once without breaking the plane. It feels very similar. They just turn into drag monsters all of a sudden, and once they do that, there's nothing you can do to remedy it. Again, versus DCS, where it's recoverable. Okay, we're going to... Oh, I'm very low on fuel. We're going to start coming around now. I'm going to dump the gear. We're already at takeoff flap. I'm just going to nudge the power on a bit more. We're going to go full flap. And I'm going to watch that airspeed like a hawk. So we'll approach about 380-ish. Oh, that runway's looking awful short. Again, I can't reference my correct AOA. I shouldn't be referencing speed, I should be referencing AOA, but I can't do it because the UUA is not showing the correct angle of attack, the correct local angle of attack. True AOA is useless to me because none of the pilot's manuals reference true AOA, they all reference the UUA, as I said before. We're a little fast. Actually, we're quite a bit fast, so we're going to pull the nose up a little. This is probably going to bring us down quite hard because the speed's going to decay really fast now that the nose has come up. There's the flare. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, she lands much harder than the DCS-21. Much, much harder. I should note that the braking chute has quite a nice animation. I think I might have just missed it. Or it's not working for some reason. It should have fired. Okay. I guess we don't have a braking chute, and I guess we don't have wheel brakes. Why do I not have any air pressure? It's showing I've got air pressure. No emergency brake either. The parking brake gonna work? Nope. Very interesting. So why did that happen? Oh, we just avoid the overrun. Oh, no. Yeah, we got no pressure in the brakes. See that? Nothing happening. But it says we still got, like, 80 kilos per square centimeter of air pressure in the main brake system. So that should mean that we should have wheel brakes. Obviously, the emergency brake should work, which they aren't. Yeah, the emergency brakes aren't working. Main brake's not working. And the drag chute isn't working. So my question becomes why? What did I do that the plane didn't like for none of that to come out? You can see the doors haven't even opened for the chute. Unfortunate. I also didn't bother to put the landing lights down. It's broad daylight. Don't really need them. I guess we have just enough fuel left that we could probably taxi off the runway. And since, you know, since we can steer without differential brakes in this, the lack of brake pressure shouldn't hurt us. Oh no, we do have brake pressure, just the brake gauge is not working, and the brakes weren't very effective. So if we have brake pressure, then why did our parachute not deploy? Do I need to actually use the button on the side? Like, is this for some reason not actually bound? That would be very odd. I don't know why that would be the case. Also, while we're taxiing, let's test something. Yeah, okay. The ARU manual adjustment switch doesn't work. That should be a 3-position sprung switch with the center position being neutral, but it isn't working at all. That's a very important switch too, because that's an emergency procedure. If that system's not working, and you can't set it correctly to manual, you abandon the aircraft. Excuse me, you abandon the aircraft if that isn't working and you can't manually set it to long arm for landing. So yeah, overall impressions, it looks like a MiG. It doesn't really sound like one. It doesn't really fly like one. I think with the right work, it could be made into something good. But again, like I'm going to be brutally honest, for the asking price of, what is it, €40? Particularly if you are a DCS player who has a lot of time on the MiG-21 in that, or, you know, somebody with actual experience on the real MiG-21, considering what the flight model on this thing's like, you might want to avoid it until that work happens, if it happens. I hope it does. I hope the devs continue to support this. I hope they continue to improve their product, and I hope they're able to bring it more into line with what the aircraft should be, versus what it currently is. Personally speaking, the joys of a flight sim for me are obviously partly sightseeing, because this sim does look so damn good, but the feel of the aircraft. If the flight model is really badly out of whack, it can kind of ruin the entire experience for me. I don't care as much about systems. I mean, obviously having the systems correct is good, particularly things like the MiG-21's autopilot, because of the importance of the way it's integrated into the aircraft's control system, the stabilization mode in particular, which we fucking still don't have in DCS, not working anyway. stuff like that, yeah, kind of important. But like, if the if an airliner's autopilot isn't 100% hands off, go get myself a drink, watch a movie while the plane flies itself, I don't really care. I play flight sims for the I play flight sims for the feeling of flight, the ability to appreciate an aircraft that I might not get to ever fly in real life, or fly in real life. Obviously, I do fly the Jab in the sim, which is the plane I learnt to fly on, but most of the things that I fly in this, I'm never going to get my hands on, and I'm never going to get to be a passenger in. So, my kind of priority list for a flight sim is the flight model is at the absolute top. Critical systems like flight controls, basic navigation, that sort of thing, those are the next tier, and then visuals and sounds and so on, like the immersion factors, and way down the fucking bottom, you have all the more typical civilian simmer desires, like, GPS and fancy airliner level autopilot, all that stuff. I don't care. But yeah, I'm not going to say I'm disappointed, because this is actually pretty close to what I expected, but I was kind of vaguely holding out the hope that I'd be surprised, and I'm not surprised. Anyway, guys, I hope this is useful to some of you. I hope that, me sitting here kind of blathering on for nearly 2 hours at this point does provide you with some kind of useful guidance, whether you want to pick up this aircraft or not. Like I said, if you're a DCS player or somebody that really does care about things being 100%, I would not recommend it in its current state, unfortunately. I would say keep an eye on it, but there's a lot that needs to be worked on here before I would recommend it. Let's go ahead and do a quick shutdown. I'm not shutting this down in the correct order. I know I've probably just blown a bunch of electrical systems, but if they're not modeled in DCS, then, I'm not really concerned that they will be modeled here after what we've seen so far. We're just going to leave. We'll turn that off. We'll turn that off. We'll leave those two where they are. Turn them off. What else do we need? SPS can stay on. ARU stays in automatic. Yeah, they can all stay on. You really shouldn't be touching those switches. Fire extinguisher can go off. Electrical starter can go off. Fuel pumps are off, aren't they? Yes, they are. Sounds like something's still running. It's probably the inverters. So that's all dealt with. I should have really brought the flaps up earlier when we still had pressure in the system. We're just going to set them to take off. They should auto retract anyway. The flaps would settle as the pressure bleeds off regardless, so whatever. Set them to take off, and then you can ease the springs. I don't think the button to ease the springs is, it's not even present in this module. It is in DCS. Doesn't really matter. That reset button only just, saves the springs on the buttons. It's an easy part to replace. It's not a big deal. We're going to set this to cold crank, so the next person to start the aircraft's probably going to want to cold crank it to get the excess fuel out of that little drip line I spoke about at the start of the video. All that stuff, weapon stuff, doesn't matter because it doesn't have weapons. None of that really matters. Yeah, that's pretty much everything. So we'll just switch off the radio, come down here and switch that off, and then we'll start, or we won't start, we'll switch off everything else. And this is a MSFS thing. For some reason it closes your canopy or doors or whatever when you fully shut the aircraft down, which is odd. I don't know why it does that, and I wish it didn't. And again, we see the animations all happen immediately in sequence as I go to the external view. That's a MSFS issue as well. That's not on the developer of this module. You can see the air brakes have settled now that there's no hydraulic pressure in the system, and you can see that trailing air brake, which should have come down earlier, is now sagging. That air brake has like a mechanical inhibitor on it, so that when there is something loaded on the center pylon, it cannot come down. It is locked in the up position. But once there's nothing on the center pylon, that air brake operates with the other two, synchronized with the other two. So that's that's another little thing that's not really correct in this. But yeah, I mean, again, if the price was lower, I would probably have less complaints. I'd be a little less critical. If the flight model was, even close to reality, I'd be probably a lot less critical about some of the systems issues or the things I think could be done better about the art. It's just if the flight model's not there for me, then that kind of is the cornerstone, the foundation of the entire module. So it is what it is. If they seriously drop the price on it, maybe it'd be worth looking into then. If they fix the issues, then it would be worth reassessing. If modders are able to fix the issues, once an unencrypted version's available that they can actually edit, then, maybe this is going to become one of those modules that, for the price of entry in its default state isn't worth it, but with the right mods it becomes very worth it, like certain other aircraft. 414. Just because devs either, don't get round to applying important fixes, or in the case of too many flight simulator devs, they don't believe there's a problem, and so they refuse to fix it. Hopefully the devs for this prove not to belong to the second group. Just for a little bit extra background information, these guys also made an F111 for FSX, which I have. It was very similar, so the flight performance was kind of otherworldly even for an F111, which is really saying something. The art was alright. It was maybe a little overworn in places, but it wasn't bad. But there were a lot of little things that kind of added up to it. So I think as a developer they have potential. They just need to focus more on nailing the basics, like the flight model and the systems modeling, and maybe worry a little less about the fancy show-off features. I know the P3D version of this had things like bird strikes. I don't know if those are going to come to the MSFS version, or if they're already implemented and I just got lucky and didn't have one. But little features like that are nice. Things like state saving, things like wear and tear, all of that stuff's really nice, but you need to have the basics down first. If, for instance, we'll use a 310 as an example. If the 310 had all of the bells and whistles it has, but its flight model was like complete trash, or, its systems were all ass backwards and just not working at all, as they were supposed to, then, it wouldn't be the amazing module it is, and I would not be recommending it to people, even for its incredibly low price. As we approach hour number 2 of this video, once again, I hope you guys find this useful. I made this entirely because I needed somebody to go through these things for me, and nobody did. Just because there's not enough videos out on this module yet, and there's not enough people really in the MSFS scene who understand this aircraft to any degree, let alone any real degree. So yeah, hope you guys find it useful. I hope the devs of this are able to continue improving on it and bring it up to a point where I will happily say I would recommend it to people. I really hope they do. Like I've said before regarding some DCS devs, you never want to see a developer stagnate or fail. You always want to see them improve, even if they kind of kick and scream about it. So fingers crossed for that. Anyway, guys, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Wish you clear skies and fair winds, and I will catch you in the skies of MSFS, or DCS, or who knows, maybe elsewhere.